Welcome back. Right now, we are going to discuss the digital divide in education, especially as it relates to internet access. This is definitely something that is needed throughout all schools across the country right now, as schools fluctuate between in-person and online learning, and some students are at a distinct disadvantage because they don't have correct internet access or the technology they need for their schooling. We dug into this topic more. Let's take a look.
Today we are talking about the digital divide crisis in education, and joining us is Western Governors University President Scott Pulsipher to talk with us about what we can do about this widening during this pandemic. Scott, thanks for joining us here on Park City Television.
Thank you so much for having me, Christine.
How fast is the digital divide in America?
It's much larger than I think most would imagine, specifically in learning. As students and adults are returning to campuses this fall and going back to the classroom, we recognize that the new normal includes online, and that is a factor in most every student's experience now. And 15 million students across the country do not have access to reliable high-speed internet. To put a finer point on this, there in Utah, 1 in 5 children do not have reliable high-speed internet. And this is cutting them off from their learning. Quite frankly, they're offline and out of mind. We are not recognizing that this is impeding their progress. And if we don't address this issue, it's going to, these children will not recover from this. Their progress will be impeded, and it will get exponentially worse. And it's just unacceptable, if you will, that students are camping in a Taco Bell parking lot, trying to leverage the restaurant's Wi-Fi to do their homework, or parents are seeing children trying to do their homework on a smartphone. And this is just not going to help them engage in a way that will help them progress in their learning. And so this digital divide is a much larger and much broader problem than most people recognize. And if we don't solve it, we will really have many that won't recover. And they, offline and out of mind is just an unacceptable condition.
So what can be done to help with this problem?
Yeah, most often imagine that the problem is mostly an infrastructure or a coverage problem, that if we continue to invest in the infrastructure, that will solve it. And that will for many who are in rural locations, and we know throughout Utah how many live in such rural locations. That needs to continue to be invested in. But much of the challenge often has to do with affordability. We need to also recognize is that 1 in 3 children in households earning less than $30,000 a year do not have reliable internet access. And so, parents need to be reaching out to both national and local leaders to ensure that this issue is top of mind. I think that it requires public and private partnerships to ensure that options are available for students to access affordable service plans, but at the same time as our national leaders in Washington, where I'm located today, that as they contemplate the next stimulus package, that this issue is one that's top of mind and being addressed so that funding can be made available directly to individuals and households, while also there can be incentives to drive the investment to expand the coverage. Lastly, I would say that WGU is doing our part. We offer online access scholarships that allows individuals to cover devices and service, internet service as part of their learning so they can continue to access the programs that they need. It's going to take all of us to make sure that we solve this in a holistic way.
And do you think that as things change and perhaps more students do return into in-person learning, that this will take more of a back spot to other issues? How are you hoping to keep it on the forefront?
I think there's one thing's for sure is WGU has long been an online provider of high quality education, is that the internet is probably one of the most efficient ways to expand access to education. And that's true both in higher education as well as in K-12 education. The pandemic has amplified these issues. But in reality, it's mostly just identified that the internet is a reality of all of our experiences, including learning going forward. It is a necessity of life. And so even as students come back to the classroom, not all of the learning will end when the classroom dismisses. It will extend to post-class environments, engagement with content. All of their courses and assignments are online. this is impacting the learning in the models that we see going forward. And so offline and out of mind cannot be an acceptable condition that we're living with. So we need to elevate the awareness and recognize that this is a crisis that the pandemic has amplified. One last thing I would say on this point is that it has also identified an additional challenge here where many adults who've lost jobs and been displaced, they need to acquire skills for their next job. And if internet access is a barrier, they can't even begin the learning that they need to acquire those skills and be on to their next job to improve their lives. So that's another thing that the pandemic has heightened around this digital divide and why this crisis needs to be addressed now.
The ripple effects are astounding. What can educators and administrators do to advance online access and online learning participation?
I think parents and households, we need to make sure that we're reaching out to our national and state leaders. The institutions themselves need to be figuring out how to expand scholarships like what WGU is doing, or investing in hotspots, or enabling device sharing, et cetera. Many of these even short-term solutions can be part of solving the problem, but we need to engage in the long term for the holistic approach so that every student has the possibility of access as well as a high probability of completing and getting the learning they need.
Absolutely. Where can we get more information and get more engaged and involved in this issue?
Yeah, you can learn more about this by going to wgu.edu/access to learn more.
Thank you so much, Scott, for talking with us today here on Park City Television about this digital divide crisis in education.
Thank you so much for the time, Christine.